So I have a question for you that I know a
Sure.
lot of people watching have because they've asked me this damn question so many times, and that is with your model of legalization, should youths have access to psychedelics?
That is, I wrote a paper on how psychedelics should be legalized.
Mm-hmm.
And the question of youth access was the most difficult section that we wrote. And we had to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, trying to figure out what our answer would be. To answer that question, we first started looking at indigenous communities. And what we noticed is they're not consistent. For example, the Ayahuasquero community, pregnant women show up, breastfeeding women show up, women with toddlers show up. It's done in family contexts. And so there's no age issue at all with the process. With the peyote folks, well, it is age related. It's about puberty. And so often people are invited into the teepee after they hit puberty and they become a man or a woman. And so it's really about a transitions. So, okay, that's useful information. We went into the when can young folks drink alcohol with not being of the legal age, so long as they're supervised by their parents question. And we found many states in the United States, we had found papers that referred to many states, actually it is legal for a young person to have a drink of alcohol as long as their parents are supervising. That's a useful piece of information. The third piece of the puzzle for us was we're thinking about this as a health service. Psychedelic experiences are a health service. So how do youth access health services? Well, it's not about age, it's about maturity. If a young girl who is underage shows up in her doctor's office and says, I'm sexually active, I'd like to be on the birth control pill, the doctor doesn't say, let me check your age, and then I need to phone your parents and ask them that question. It's about, do you understand what you're asking for? And if the answer is yes, then you can form independent decisions around your own health care. So we put all of that together. And what we said is, yes, youth should be able to access the psychedelic experiences. And it isn't about absolute age, it's about majority. It's about maturity.
Maturity.
It's about maturity. And it's about, so if they wanted the experience, they would first be encouraged to invite their parents, because we know that parents who do psychedelics with their youth, it can be incredibly bonding for a family.
Like, what age groups are we talking here?
Well,
I know you said maturity, I get it.
It's not about age.
Really not at all?
It's about maturity.
So you give like a 7-year-old acid?
But they wouldn't, they're not mature enough to understand.
Good
So
point.
we're talking about,
What about 11?
it's not about age. It's about maturity.
So if the 11-year-old is mature, you could potentially have an 11-year-old tripping.
It's not about age. It's about maturity. And so it's about, do you understand what you're asking for, and are you mature enough to go to that place of being clear as to what you want? You'd be invited to participate with your parents. But if you declined, you really didn't want to do this with your parents, then what you would do,
Sorry, continue.
What you would do is you would be allowed to access the experience by somebody who was a trained professional in providing that experience for youth. So yes, youth should be able to access the psychedelic experience.
But on another level, isn't there that whole theory that their brains are basically already in a trip? Because they documented with the fMRI scans the brain on acid, and they said it was very similar to like an infant's brain.
So the
default mode network was...
is that problematic for the developing brain, is your question?
No, not at all. I'm not asking that at all.
Okay.
I'm saying they did the fMRI scans of people on acid, and I think it was the fMRI scans that showed this. Something like LSD causes the brain to exit the default mode network, which is what you're basically in all the time.
Yes.
And the way that the brains, the visual cortex, the visual parts of the brain were communicating with the other ones was very similar to a developing brain. It was similar to like an infant's brain, the way that it behaved before the ego structures were really hardened in there. So it's like, couldn't youths already be in kind of like a trippy state just from the fact that they are not developed in the same way?
I'm not sure that youths are in a trippy state. No,
not youths. I mean like kids. Their brains are already very different.
Well, their brains are developing, and new networks are being formed, and language is being developed, and relationship skills are being developed, and a sense of ego. Who am I? Who am I separate from my parents? And then who I am in the context of my parents is is a normal process of maturity.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that that relates to trippy or not. I don't relate to that as being trippy. No, I just think that's normal developmental stages. Yeah, but I want to explore the adolescent brain thing because
let's just rephrase the question.
So is the young brain exceptionally vulnerable to this, and therefore the psychedelic experience should be excluded?
Well, yeah, is a developing brain going to be potentially damaged by psychedelic experiences, or are these drugs dangerous for the developing brain?
Okay, let's play with that thought in a number of different angles. So angle number one is if you do population studies of people or cultures where youth do participate in these experiences, we don't see any different. We don't see damaged youth coming out of those experiences. So large studies that look at cultural use don't indicate that, and there's not even really a theory of that. What it says is the youth brain is more plastic. We know that. Not plastic in the stuff that we throw in the garbage, but plastic in the stuff that means it can change quickly and it can heal itself more quickly. So that if a youth gets a brain injury, it's completely different from if a mature adult gets a brain injury in that its ability to heal. So one could argue that the psychedelic experience would actually be advantageous to have when your brain is more plastic. I have no evidence for that, but there's not necessarily any damage. It's either damage, neutral, or good. And we actually don't know, but we have some pretty good evidence from the population studies that there isn't harm done.
When we go back to, say, on a tribal setting, what age range do they have, the kids doing the ayahuasca and stuff?
They can start at any age. Toddlers. Peyote folks can occasionally. I've read one example of a culture where the children were allowed to nibble on the peyote at a very young age. But with ayahuasca, it's more common. It's done in family context.
So do you think that the reason why this sounds absurd and dangerous to people is just because of the stigma that's attached to them?
Absolutely.
Because we have parents administering Adderall to their kids.
Yeah.
Ritalin, common one.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, that sounds a lot more damaging to a developing brain than the occasional, nibble of peyote.
Yeah, the thing with psychedelic experiences is they're very rare. People don't want to do it again and again and again.
Why is that?
Well, when you've died and met your maker, and your maker has told you that you've got some various issues going on in your unconscious mind, you need to work on those issues for a while. And going back and talking to your maker again isn't that attractive.
Right. So you find psychedelics in your research, they're anti-addictive.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's lots of good work on that, from alcoholism to tobacco cessation.
So I guess that's one fear out of a parent's mind, is your kid's not going to get addicted to acid.
Psychedelics, acid specifically, the classical psychedelics specifically, I mean, I worked in the addictions world for many decades. Nobody ever walked in my office, and nobody ever walked in any of my therapist's office saying, I can't stop taking LSD.
So how come I made a video recently about how acid isn't addictive? It wasn't a very well thought out video, mind you, but I got numerous people saying I was wrong and it can be addictive and anything can be addictive. Why are people saying acid can be addictive to me?
Well, it can't be, because you develop such a tolerance immediately.
Right. If you dosed every week, you would have to raise your dose exponentially to even have effects.
Yeah, you wouldn't have an effect. So I mean, aspirin can be addictive, but really, what's the effect of being addicted to aspirin? I mean,
so how long have you worked with addicts?
I started in 1986. The
year of my birth, baby.
The year you were born.
And your professional opinion is psychedelics cannot be addictive.
So the classics can't.
Okay.
LSD, psilocybin, mescaline.
Like they can't. No way possibly.
Well, what I can say is I have worked in the addictions field for many decades, and I've never heard of anybody being addicted.
And this is like 30 plus years.
Yes.
Wow.
Or actually 30 minus years, 28 years to be precise. But yeah, people can, with the amphetamine and the methamphetamine and the cathinone molecules, the ones that are the psychedelics, and I use that word in quotation marks, that are based on stimulants, I think have a greater addictive potential. And so there's a greater risk than the classical ones. So it's a range, yes.
It is, but the classicals, as in just psilocybin, even DMT, would that be considered a classical?
Absolutely. DMT, mescaline, psilocybin, and LSD are the four classicals.
So if someone was to be taking mushrooms every day, that wouldn't be classified as addictive, or as them being addicted to it? Is there a difference between being addicted to something and just enjoying it?
I've never heard of anybody that would take mushrooms every day.
Okay.
Why would you? Because you're not going to have an effect.
Right.
You
right.
know,
What about microdosing?
So microdosing, even the people that want it to work claim that you shouldn't do it daily. Every
Right.
3 days is a common pattern because, you know, you have the first day where you have the experience, the second day is the washout, and the third day you have the first day, which is the experience, the second day, which is the after experience, and the final day, which is the washout, and then you do it again.
I don't know if I necessarily agree to that, but I can understand the logic.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it gives you a periodic experience. And the evidence for microdosing is growing. It's
Do you
scant.
think it's effective?
It's scant right now, either as an anti-addictive agent or an antidepressant
As
agent.
an antidepressant, do you think it's effective?
It seems that the current survey work says that it is, yes. There's a growing body of evidence saying that it is effective. It's still not good data. It's still just observational kind of survey data, but it's starting to indicate that it might be helpful. So it might be something we want to do some research on. So in fact, we should talk about wild healing stories that I've heard.
So define what that is?
A wild healing story?
Yes.
Things that are out of the box that current researchers are not thinking about.
Okay.
I have 3 examples. So the first example, and this is just stuff people have told me, but they're credible people. They're credible people that I've talked to long enough to know that these stories are true.
Okay.
How applicable a story is and why these things happened, I have no idea. But the first one was a family had a single child who had oppositional defiance disorder and an eating disorder.
Okay.
And that child, it was a girl, was under the care of a babysitter and dug her way into the back of the freezer. She passed the ice cream and the frozen cookies, and she found a little lump of chocolate at the very back, and she ate it. And in that lump of chocolate was 2 grams of psilocybin mushrooms, and Cubensis mushrooms. And so the babysitter kind of figured it out because she was behaving very strangely and phoned the parents, and the parents just said, well, you know, we're experienced, just sit with her, you know, play with her, hang out with her, just don't do anything, don't freak out, just stay calm. And so they had an uneventful 4, 5, 6 hours, and the child didn't display any distress and was kind of interested. They played her some music, and she was fine. But at the end of the experience, she had no oppositional defiant disorder and no eating disorder.
Wild.
That's bizarre. That's bizarre. So there's 2 factors there. One is the transformative experience without any set setting and safety controls. The youth, it was a 9-year-old person that had this experience.
So what was the dose? Do you know?
2 grams.
Oh, 2 grams.
2 grams. 2 grams of
It's not even a crazy dose or anything.
No, but it's a very small body though. So
Oh, true.
it's a 9-year-old. So
Yeah, that'd probably be like 4 for an adult.
yeah, but that's a wild healing story. Another one that's probably even more bizarre is somebody I don't know very well. So he's a good friend of mine. His wife had a problem with constipation.
Okay.
Like she shut down. Her bowel system shut down. She waited and normally she was very healthy, so active. And a couple of days later, she goes to her doctor's office, and the doctor gives her some laxatives, and she takes them, and it doesn't help at all. So she's quite upset, and now a good chunk of a week has passed, and there's nothing going on down there. So she goes to the hospital, and they start doing workups on her, trying to understand what's going on, and they don't conclude. They can't figure out why her bowel is not working. She's completely shut down. And so she comes back from the hospital really distressed. And her partner, who's a good friend of mine, took things into his own hands. And he just said, well, let's just try this. And he gave her a pretty substantial dose of smoked 5-MeO DMT. She took the dose. She lay down on the couch for 10 minutes. And then she sat up and talked for a couple of minutes. And then she went to the bathroom. And she had the largest bowel movement of her life. And she's normal. She had no reoccurrence. I mean, I don't get it. Honestly,
weird.
I do not understand that story. Was that a complete coincidence? I mean, admittedly, from a research perspective, that's an N of 1. We have one person that had this. But I mean, wow, I don't know. That's a I put that under my heading of wild and crazy healing stories. MAPS Canada will only exist if we get funding. Psychedelic legalization needs support, and it needs support from a huge number of people who donate a small amount, and the occasional person who donates a large amount. But we can legalize psychedelics. That is my life goal, is to bring psychedelics into our people. And we need financial support to do it. There is no other path.
Totally agree. This is how we make this shit legal, guys. You want this to happen. Follow the links popping up here and down below to donate to MAPS today.
MAPS Canada.
Donate to MAPS Canada today. And yeah, sounds good. Thank you again for being on.
Thank you, Adam.
Awesome. Okay, we're done. We can wrap it up. So what did you think of the headphones?